Welcome to another episode of What Are You Reading? What Are You Writing? Welcome back. I hope many of you have been following the series and looking forward to the next one. Those of you who don't know me, I'm Karen E. Osborne. I am the author of Getting It Right, and my upcoming book is Tangled Lies. It's a murder mystery that's coming out July 22nd. And I'm so excited to be here with my guest today. This has been so fun, meeting new people, hearing about new books. It is just great. So I want to introduce you to Karri L. Moser. Did I pronounce that right, Moser?
Yes, exactly. Perfect.
Good,
And thank
good.
you. Nice to be
And
here. Nice to meet you too.
Karri is, so her latest novel is A Home for the Windswept,
Yes.
and it comes out in April. Do you know the date?
April 22nd through Black
April
Rose Writing.
22nd. That's my husband Bob's birthday.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, April 22nd it arrives. And then she has previous novels. She has includes Moose Pond Lodge, The Thriving of Willows, and The Weathering of Sea Glass. Don't you love the names of those books? Welcome, Karri. So before we talk about your titles, your books, what you're working on, could you just tell us about a book that you would recommend to our audience?
I actually just finished finished reading Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng. Yes. I listened to Brene Brown's podcast, Unlocking Us, and she had interviewed Reese Witherspoon and Kerry Washington about the Hulu series that they did based on the book. And I kind of toyed around thinking, well, I need to watch that. And then the next podcast was her interview with the author. And once I heard her interview with the author, I thought, well, as in the case in 99% of the time, the book is always better than the show. So I went out and bought the book and flew through that pretty quickly. It was so riveting, just the relationship of the two mothers and their different approaches to motherhood, yet there's similarities in the protectiveness of their children and the lives of the children and how they intermeshed and wanted to be a part of the other family. It was very riveting. It was a great read, a lot of underlying themes that I just really loved.
It was a slow burn too, wasn't it? If I could use the word burn.
Yeah.
but it built, and you knew it was something was coming. You knew something was coming. It was very, I loved that book. I highly recommend it as well to all of you. Do you,
And
do you
like
have
you said,
another one?
what was that?
Do you have another one?
Yes. Actually, right before that, I had read Kristin Hannah's The Great Alone. And that definitely makes me want to read her next one and her previous ones. The Great Alone starts out in the 70s with a teenager and her parents. The father has PTSD from his time in Vietnam, and he's very anti government, anti society. He wants to get away from it all. And they pack up and head to Alaska, to the wilds of Alaska. And because of his condition and alcoholism, he's an abuser of the wife and the daughter. And when they settle in Alaska, in the wilderness, the harsh environment, also mixed with the beauty of the environment. I have never been to Alaska, but the way Kristin Hannah sets the scene and describes just the beauty of the land and nature and how they lived off the land. That alone was the most beautiful part of the book, mixed in with this heart horror of things that unfold with this family in the midst of the most beautiful place in the world. So it's definitely a great read, but it will get to you. I can honestly say it's the first book that I had an actual nightmare about. I found myself at one part of the book having bad dreams about what was happening to one of the characters. So if you can stomach, it's not horror, but the family domestic violence aspect of it was pretty harsh, but it's such a great read, and it's a beautiful story too, about perseverance and survival and overcoming the horrors of her father in order to carve this normalcy for herself. It was a great read.
Yeah, wow. And it sounds like it had some elements of the things that you love to write about, and that is nature. It sounds like
Yes.
it included those. So tell us a little bit about, first, tell us about your writing journey. When did you know you wanted to be a writer?
I was one of those kids who always wanted to be a writer, always kind of jotting down short stories. Once I read Little Women as a little girl, I knew in the back of my mind I was going to write books. I pursued other things in school. I started out as a biology major and was really leaning towards sciences. Then I switched to being an English major because I knew in my heart writing was where my passions lie. And so I started out doing nonfiction though. I was a newspaper reporter. I did radio reporting. I did magazine work. I did years and years of freelance work from home, writing for different news outlets and magazines and web companies. And as my husband was in the Army, he was in the Army for 24 years, and we were raising our kids moving around. I even landed a government contract writing press releases and profiles of military medical personnel in the military and basically working for the Army in that respect. But I did a lot of nonfiction writing for years in so many different forms. And it wasn't until around 2012-ish, I guess, when my kids were getting older, that I went back to dabbling in fiction and wrote my first novel and finished it my daughter's senior year. As the kids reach that age, teen years, and they need you less and less, and they can drive themselves to practice, so you can sit home and and, and toy with fiction more. So that's really when I veered into fiction and dove in head first, and now that's where most of my energy goes. So
That's wonderful. Every time I ask a writer about their journey, it's the same. Like, we just knew it. We knew it from the time we were little, and we started writing when we were little.
yes.
My son, actually, who is also a writer, he wrote his first book when he was 5 years old. And I remember every page of it. So I think that that's a common theme among us, our passion for books and our passion for writing. So tell us about, let's go first to the previous books before we come to the one that's coming out in April. And tell me about these beautiful titles. Just give me a little sense of how that came about.
Well, Weathering of Sea Glass is my first one, and it was written while we were stationed away from Maine, and we had lived here for a few years, stationed here for a bit, and I fell in love with it. And I fell in love with it was the closest I'd ever lived to the ocean. I grew up military, moving around, but we never lived near the beach. So I really relished that time and the environment here. And while we were living away again, I missed it so much that this story came to fruition because of that longing to come back to the beaches. And the Weathering of Sea Glass is about two teen lovers who are rough and jagged and rough around the edges and just starting out. And they meet 35 years later, after life has tumbled them and beaten them both up and smoothed out those edges. And when they reconnect, they're entirely different than they were as 18-year-olds. So hence the title, The Weathering of Sea Glass. They are essentially like sea glass, beaten up by time and the tides and smoothed out by the roughness of life. So it's kind of a metaphor for them. And the main character makes jewelry out of sea glass in the store she runs on the coast. So it ties in together, but that's where that title stems from, is basically how we're all a piece of sea glass, getting beaten up and smoothed out, and we're much different as time goes on.
That's beautiful. That is really, really beautiful. Tell me about the new book that's coming out in April.
A Home for the Windswept. It starts in Maine. It's a 23-year-old couple in 2008 in a paper mill town in northern Maine. It's the only industry in town. We all know small towns like that. I went to high school in a small town like that in Pennsylvania. And well, the paper mill gets shut down because of the tech boom and the recession happening at the same time. So they're 23. They have a third child on the way. They're living in a single wide trailer, and the only job in town has been ripped away. So Basil, the husband, is at his wit's end because his main motivation in life is to care for his young wife and their 3 kids. He wants to be the best dad and husband he can be, and he sees every opportunity just ripped from him. So in a state of drunken despair, he's watching the news after the paper mill is closed, and he sees a tornado has ravaged Franklin, Nebraska, and they're 1,000 miles away in Maine, but he's riveted by this story. He decides then, he has an epiphany that man and man's greed and Wall Street and the tech boom, man took everything from them, all of his hope and aspirations and plans for his young family. God's wrath can provide and replace that if they move to Nebraska and rebuild tornado damage. So what man has taken away, in Basil's mind, God's wrath will now provide. So he has to convince his young 23-year-old wife, pregnant with a third child, to pack up and move to Nebraska and basically chase tornadoes. And she fears, of course, that his breakthrough that he believes he's had is a breakdown. Yeah, so the story is their journey as a young couple and trying to make their way in an entirely different environment, and her struggle with the fact that they're setting out to profit off the loss of others. And he justifies it as, we're profiting because man took everything away from us. God is giving us this opportunity to survive. He's going to devastate these towns in order for us to thrive. So that's, yeah. And they're trying to find their own way in a home and a life of their own as a young couple. So hence the title of that, a home for the Windswept.
Wow, that sounds like a beautiful story.
Thank you.
I can't wait for it to come out and to read it.
Thank you.
It does sound really amazing, and I can imagine what the characters' arcs might be.
Yes.
There's a lot of learning, it sounds like,
they're very dear to my heart, this young couple. I you know how you absorb your characters and you just love them. So they've been hard to unleash and let go of. So I'm anxious for that book to come out and see if others love them as much as I do.
Oh, I am sure they will. Are you working on anything now?
Yes, I found it very difficult when the pandemic first started to do anything creative. So I did a lot of what I called professional development with, listening to podcasts and author interviews. And for months, I was unable to write anything, although I had a character in my head for about the last year. Her name is Abilene Marigold Matterly, and she's a 16-year-old. And there wasn't much formulating as to what was going to happen in her life until probably about the last 2 months. It really started to come to me, and I jumped right in, and I'm about 35 pages into that book. And it's the story of her. She's 16, small town life, of course. And she is basically a second mom to all of her young siblings. Her mom is a single mom who works all the time. So Abilene is the one, changing the diapers, cooking the dinner, helping the kids, with homework and everything. And there comes a point in the story where she realizes everything her mom has told her about her childhood and her origins and their family is a complete lie. And she is absolutely devastated. So she finds her dad and contacts her dad, who is a soldier. And she runs off to find her father and goes to high school on a military base, and then falls in love with a soldier and soon has a child of her own. And Abilene's main goal is to not end up like her mom, and never to put her kids in a position like she was put in, and to basically get over the trauma of this big lie she's been told all of her life. But then she finds herself unwittingly falling into the same pattern and heading down the same road. So she has to struggle with the kind of mom she wants to be based on the mom she had. And the part where, my dad was in the Army, so I kind of pull from that. And then my husband was in the Army when I met and married him, and then for 20 years later. So I kind of pulled from that. But aside from that, the rest of it's all fiction. But I do work in a lot about our military life, living on Army post, and the kind of relationships you form with other kids and with other, Army wives. So I draw from experience to bring a little bit of biographical information to that one. But the rest is fiction.
It sounds
So
it sounds
that's what I'm
good. It
working on
sounds
now.
wonderful. Don't we often end up doing what our parents did, even as we work so hard to not repeat their mistakes
Yes.
and not? It's so generational. It first it takes
Yes.
therapy to get out of it. Well, I want to thank you so much, Karri, for joining us today, and I want to thank everybody that's listening and watching. We're so glad that you are here. You can find Karri. Karri, where can our guests find you on social media?
On Facebook, Karri L. Moser author is my author page. And I'm also on Twitter under Karri Mo Writes. So both of those platforms I'm frequently on, and Instagram too, but that's hard to establish a relationship with other than,
Yes.
sharing
So check
photos.
Karri out on her Facebook page, and I hope you will. If you have any questions for Karri or you have any questions for me, you can find me on Karen E. Osborne Author on Facebook, and my website is www.kareneosborne.com. Thank you again. Thank you, Karri. Thanks everybody for listening. You guys stay safe.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me.